What? I'm going to have to talk to an empty room? Just... That's weird. Uh, well, okay. Oh! We're recording. Sorry. Um, Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Michael Bolton on an extremely creaky chair in my extremely untidy office, speaking all alone to a screen. Wherever you are, though, I hope you're going to enjoy the presentation, which was originally put together by my colleague James Bach. And this is a revision of that for my own spin. James was going to call it the real Agile Testing Quadrants, and I said to him, James, you can't do that. There's no way you can do that. As context-driven testers, we can't claim reality or authority over anything, especially something that somebody else has done. So this is the name of the presentation, the Agile Testing Quadrants, as we believe they should always have been, with the benefit of hindsight, experience, and some debugging. Let's talk about what this is all about and why we're here. A few months ago, back in Stockholm, Sweden, after the Let's Test conference, James and I got to chatting about the Agile Testing Quadrants and how they fit in with rapid software testing, indeed how Agile testing fit in with rapid software testing. And as we chatted, we realized that we had a lot in common in terms of our problems with the Agile Testing Quadrants as they currently are conceived. So let's get started with the idea that, first of all, we're not attacking or reinventing Agile development, and we're not attacking or reinventing the role of testing within it. What we'd prefer to do is we would prefer to honor the principles of Agile development and the practices of the Agile community as those people advocate those principles and practices in their best light. We want to help Agile testing look good. And we want to make the Agile community look good. We want to help do that. In so doing, though, we had a look at the Agile quadrants as a heuristic for organizing or strategizing for software testing. And we found them wanting. In fact, we found them unhelpful in various places and outright misleading in other places. So what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to answer the question, how does rapid software testing fit into Agile development? And in order to do that, we're going to, as I said earlier, debug the rapid testing quadrants to get rid of some of the problems that we've seen with them, and maybe some other people have seen those problems too. So let's start by looking at the role of testing. To us, in the rapid testing namespace, if you will, testing is evaluating a product by learning about it through experimentation. Testing is a process of investigating the software and investigating the ideas behind the software. We do that not only by experimenting with the product, but by experimenting with other stuff too. Performing thought experiments, asking what-if questions about requirements, about specifications, about ideas that people have, participating in discussions with the rest of the development team. And our principal mode of doing that is to ask what if and try ideas out. Try them out by interacting with the software or by chatting about them with other folks. The role of the tester is to develop him or herself as a tester, to build skill, to engage with the clients, the stakeholders of the project, in particular the product owners and the developers, to get ready for testing, not just for testing this product, but for testing in general, and to continually refine our ideas and our skills, our knowledge, our awareness of technology, and then to perform testing. Testing is fundamentally, first and foremost, a performance. It is activity. It is a performance. It's not an artifact, a point which we'll come back to. And then to report on what we've done in the rapid testing namespace, we talk about the three-part testing story. a story about the product, what it is, what it does, how it works, how it doesn't work, how it might not work in ways that matter to our clients. But we also tell a second level story, a story about how we tested, what we did, what we covered, how we configured and observed and operated and evaluated the product, and what we haven't done yet, or what we don't intend to do at all unless our clients provide us feedback wherein they say they'd like us to do that stuff. There's a third level to the testing story too, a story about how good our testing was, the quality of our testing. What things got in the way of testing and what made it harder. In Agile testing, all that stuff remains the same. That's what testers do. That's the meaning in the history of the word testing. To test, to us at least, is to do all that stuff. It's not our role, we reckon, to be quality police or quality assurance people. We can't assure quality. We don't have control over the schedule or the budget. We don't have control over hiring and firing of people on the project. We don't have control over the source code. As testers, we're not allowed to plunge in and change the code. And even though I program, I would not want to do that, certainly not want to do that solo, when my responsibility is to test. We'll come back to that issue later. If we take on the role of quality improvement or quality policing or quality assurance, really what we're doing is we're taking on responsibility without authority. We're usurping the role of management, and we're also setting ourselves up as scapegoats. After all, if we're responsible for quality, any problem in the quality of the product after release is going to be put upon us. It's going to be made our responsibility. But we believe in something more holistic and something more close to what the Agile community has always espoused, that on an Agile team, everybody is responsible for quality. Producing a quality product is a goal that we all share. The key thing that testers provide, though, is the insight that quality is value to some person or persons who matter. In rapid testing, that's how we approach quality, from the idea that it's a relationship. Quality is not an attribute of a product. You can't point at a part of the product and say, oh, look, there's the quality bit there, and there's the bit that represents quality. Nuh-uh. For us, quality is value to some person, and that means that some people may be perfectly happy with some part of the product, and for other people, value might be threatened. It's our job to provide insight into the kinds of people who might have problems and the kinds of problems that they might encounter, along with experimenting with the product to see if those problems are in there, if those problems are likely to be encountered by somebody who matters. And that is a very challenging job. It requires us to be conversant with the product and with comparable products, with the people who work on the project and how they work, with the design, with the documentation, with the ways that we can set the product up to interact with tools so that we can examine the product, drive it using those tools, so that we can probe at its inner state, so that we can generate data for it. There's a lot of stuff that we have to learn if we want to be testers, and that's a challenging job. Adding the role of quality policeman, or adding pseudo-management roles to it, makes testing harder, makes it slower, and it distracts us from our job, which is testing the product. But hang on. Does that mean that testers should only look for bugs? I mean, is that the tester's role, just to look for bugs? Well, what's the story with roles anyway? If I'm a developer, if I'm in that role, can I do testing? Sure you can. If I'm a tester, can I make quality better? Sure, why not? If I'm a goalie, can I score goals too? Well, hey, there's no rule against it. Well, if I'm a janitor, can I offer suggestions to the CEO? Why not? If I'm the driver of a car, can I grab the steering wheel? Hey, feel free. Now, our roles don't lock us into things. A role is a heuristic. It's a fallible method for solving the problem of dividing work on a project. It's not a silo, and it's not a prison. We can be in silos, in fact, but let's put in sliding doors. Let's put in picture windows. Let's put in sunroofs. Let's put in lots of stuff to make sure that we can get in and out of our silo easily, and that other people are welcome into our silos too. If you're a developer, can you do testing? Sure. As a developer, you already do testing. But if you want to do really great testing, you're going to have to sharpen your testing skills. And like everybody else, you're going to have to deal with certain kinds of cognitive failures and certain kinds of biases. If you're a tester, can you make quality better? Absolutely. But if you do that, you will have adopted, at least for a little while, the role of a developer, somebody who is developing the product. That's fine. There's no problem with doing that. But it's hard to wear two hats at the same time. It's hard for you to have the builder mindset and the tester mindset at the same time, something we'll come back to a little later. If I'm a goalie, can I score goals too? Sure you can. But if you come forward, your own goal is open. And the person who might be moving into a position to cover the goal can't use his hands the way a goalie can, and probably doesn't have your skills. So, as a tester, sure you can come out of the net, but you're leaving the net unguarded when that happens. If I'm a janitor, can I offer suggestions to the CEO? Hey, anybody can offer suggestions to the CEO, but the CEO's role is not necessarily to agree with what you're suggesting or to go about implementing it. If I'm the driver of the car, if I'm not the driver of the car, can I grab the steering wheel? Hey, sure, go ahead. As long as there's trouble, if the driver is incapacitated. Otherwise, it might be a good idea to ask nicely before you go grabbing the wheel while somebody else is driving, and to respect the answer you get. There are some roles that are stricter than others. If you're a father, do you have to do fathering? I'm a father, and I have to do fathering. I have to do fathering all the time. That's my role. All right, let's get back to the Agile Testing Quadrants and some of our problems with them. As a matter of sort of history, James encountered the quadrants in 2003 or so, perhaps surrounding the Agile Fusion conference, which was held at his lab at Front Royal, Virginia. A bunch of Agilists and a bunch of testers got together to talk about how testing and Agile fit together. And unfortunately, that conference ended in some disagreement. Meanwhile, Brian Marick, it's unfair to Brian Marick to have his name show up as a misspelling. Let's fix that and add him to the dictionary. There we go. Brian Marick presented those quadrants to James. I myself started to hear about them not too long after that, probably through the Agile Testing mailing list. That was a kind of frustrating place for me, even though I hung out there for 5 years or so. They talked about processes and tools a lot, and we had a lot of arguments about the role of skill. It seemed to me that the processes and tools were taking precedence and priority in those discussions over individuals and interactions, over the skills of testing, over how to model testing, how to talk about testing, how to describe testing, how to do testing. There's a great fascination with processes and tools, and that didn't seem like it was consistent with the premises of the Agile Manifesto. They talked about checking a lot, but they didn't call it that, and as a matter of fact, I didn't either. I didn't start to call things, to make the distinction between testing and checking until 2009. So, in fairness, talking about testing and checking was something that wasn't going on back then. Anyway, after 2008, I gave up. I got tired of people focusing on the tools and focusing on the automation. Not to say that those things aren't important, but they weren't at the center of testing for me, and I found the overemphasis on that kind of discouraging. I believe that the quadrants help to some degree to feed that misrepresentation, and we'll look at that in just a minute. But the other thing that has gone on is that we have learned in the 10 or 11 years since the quadrants first appeared, we've learned a lot about how to talk about testing and how to talk about testing in an agile context. And so it's time for us to give these things an upgrade and see what we can do with them, while at the same time honoring the work that people put into them. Here's Brian Marick's original set of quadrants. He just divided things into business-facing tests and technology-facing tests. Tests on the one hand that critiqued the product, and tests on the other hand that supported programming. Now, I'd like you to pay attention to what happened a little while later when Lisa Crisipin and Janet Gregory started talking about the Agile Testing Quadrants and published them in the book called Agile Testing, to which I made a small contribution on exploratory work. Let's have a look at that. Notice they've added a bunch more detail. They've numbered the quadrants, and they have also made this interesting little change in terms of changing supporting program to supporting the team. There are a bunch of other things they've added too. They've added the clouds in the corner that talk about automated and manual and tool stuff. And they've added some ideas about functional tests and examples and story tests and prototypes and simulations in the second quadrant. And they've talked about exploratory testing and scenarios and usability testing and user acceptance testing and alpha and beta testing in the third quadrant, and unit tests and component tests down at the bottom, and performance tests and load testing and security testing and ILID testing. You know, when I think about ILID testing, I think what they mean by that is parafunctional testing, stuff that's over and above the functions. But it seems to me that those things pervade testing. The idea of testing for other ILIDs. In fact, tools suffuse testing. They're all around testing, all around in all of the quadrants, and not just in the lower right. The distinction between manual and automated testing is something that bothered me. But perhaps the thing that bothered me most was the idea of the contrast, the polarity between critiquing the product and supporting the team. Somebody who critiques a product on the team is supporting the team. It's how testers support the team. We look for important problems in the product, problems that threaten value, and in doing that, we support the team and we support the development process. Now, you might actually like the old Agile Testing Quadrants. Now, why? Well, why not? It's an example of a generic, although fairly thin, but it's a reasonably diversified kind of test strategy. Well, the way we answer that is that sure, we can all have generic test strategies that don't misrepresent testing the way we see it, and that go much deeper. And that's what we'd like to do. That's what we like to do whenever we look at testing issues. We'd like to dive in and dig deep. So let's see what we can come up with. Our primary motivation, as I alluded to earlier, is that people have been asking us how rapid testing fits with agile testing. And so this is a long delayed and long put off attempt at making a bridge between those things. And the quadrants are 10 years old, and as I said earlier, we've learned about how to describe and to frame the work of testing and the work of testing in agile projects. I've worked on agile projects, worked with agile developers and with some of my clients who are working in agile contexts, and we've learned a lot from that. And then there are a few things that have been bugging us about that, so here are some bug fixes. Let's look at the bugs first. Supporting programs, supporting the team. Brian's stuff, let's change his name for misspelling again. It's amazing how there's that little bug in PowerPoint that insists that his name is spelled wrong. I'm sorry about that, Brian. Brian is a good guy. I owe a lot of my career to Brian, in fact, because Brian gave me an opportunity to write articles for Better Software magazine back in 2006 or 2007, and he was a very tenacious and very thoughtful and very good editor who challenged me constantly to sharpen the way I talked about testing. Brian did a wonderful job at helping to kickstart my career and the way I thought about testing. So honor is due to him. When he developed the quadrants, he talked about output checks as being integral to the programming process, and more so than the kind of investigative testing that testers do. Now, maybe he was talking about a lower kind of critical distance related to unit checking and to output checking, what he called unit testing, or maybe at the time test-driven development. Maybe he was talking about the lower critical distance issue. We'll come back to that issue, and if that's what he meant, that you can't find too much fault with that. However, it's all Agile development, isn't it? So let's treat it all as connected. Let's treat testing of all kinds as integral to the development process. I've already talked about how my problem with critiquing the product is not supporting the team. I don't agree with that. Critiquing the product is supporting the team. There's also an implication that critiquing the product is not supporting programming. And that, in turn, has the implication that a tester doesn't have any place on an Agile team unless that tester also writes code. I just can't accept that. I think it's really important for testers to learn to code. I think it's a great idea for testers to learn to code. Apart from everything else, it teaches you humility. It teaches you how hard a job it is to code. But it also teaches you important things about the way code works. It also teaches you important things about the kinds of errors that you might expect to see in code. It teaches you things about coding. And it also helps. It's really helpful for a tester to be able to write little test programs, little scripts in Ruby or Python or in Perl, even for you folks who are getting a little bit older and long in the tooth, or in some of the newer scripting languages. It's good to do that. It's fine to do that. It's important to do that. But it's not all that a tester does, and it's not the only set of skills that testers bring to the team. On my team, I like to have people who are great at writing. I like to have people who are great at describing what they do. I like to have people who are great at modeling. I like to have people who are playful and who like to interact and explore the product. I like to have domain experts. I like to have people with experience on this kind of product or on products like it. Whether or not they code, that's okay. There's lots of people who code around a development project. And as James Bach has said so wonderfully, you have two choices as a tester. You can learn to code, or you can learn to be charming and ask people for favors. As he's also said, knowing a programmer is like having a friend with a pickup truck. And if you're charming and helpful to them, they will be helpful to you by helping you with coding or writing code on their own to support your work. Tools and techniques are every place. We've got all kinds of testing with tools in all four of the Agile quadrants as we see them. And I think that Janet and Lisa would agree these days that there are tools suffusing all of Agile testing and all of development, and they're not remarkable in testing. We use them all over the place for all kinds of things. More to the point, there's no such thing as manual testing or automated testing. Any more than there is such a thing as manual or automated programming or manual or automated research. There's direct interaction with the product. Sometimes that's mediated with tools, and sometimes it's less mediated with tools. But there's always tools around, and to call testing manual, I think, misses the point. The hands in testing are not what does the testing, nor are the tools what does the testing. What does the testing is the tester's brain. The testing is done as a thinking, cognitive process, and that's assisted by hands and it's assisted by tools. But to call something manual or automated testing, I think, is silly, and I've written about that. Both the Marick and Crisipin Gregory versions of the Agile Quadrants attach certain techniques and approaches to certain quadrants, but we believe that just about any technique or approach could relate to any quadrant. And the quadrants, I think, and James believes, represent more global ideas, more overarching tasks and goals. Testing is more than checking. Both of the versions confuse output checking, which can be automated, with testing, which is not. We've talked quite a bit about this. You can have a look at our work on this in James's blog post called Testing and Checking Refined. And in fairness, this is a relatively new distinction. It certainly has arrived since the quadrants themselves arrived. And it's not just a misconception in the Agile testing community. In fact, it's probably even more subjective confusion and misunderstanding outside the Agile testing community. And indeed, the idea of checked examples comes into discussion of Agile testing through Brian Marick's own work. Now, he says that he got it from Ward Cunningham, and I would have to believe that somewhere along the line the idea of checked examples came to me through Brian or Kim Kaner or a number of people, that there's some credit due there. The idea of checking has been around for a long time. In fact, if we look at it, my earliest find for a citation to checking comes from Alan Turing himself. Certainly D.D. McCracken in 1957 referred to desk checking, so the idea has been around for a long time. It's only since 2008 that we started to make this distinction and to explicate it. So honor is due, and nonetheless it's time for us to move into something where we clear up the distinction between checking and testing. One more thing that we want to address, though, and that is the idea of test cases or examples as being tests. A test case is not a test. An example is not a test. Test is a verb. To test means to perform something. A test is a performance. It's not an artifact. It's not an example. It's not a script. We have good words for examples in script, like examples and scripts. Let's treat an example for the useful thing it is, for something that illuminates or elucidates a specification, for something that helps us to understand something. An example is not a test. A script is not a test either, because testing cannot be encoded. In exactly the same way that programming can't be encoded, there's interpretation, invention, innovation, problem solving that happens in programming work, and all of that stuff happens in testing. You cannot script programming. You can write a script, you can program a script, but you cannot script programming, and you cannot script testing in that way. You can script a check, and you can script machinery to do lots of useful things for you, but you can't script testing itself. We also don't really cotton to the idea of having business people read the tests, because testing, if it can't be scripted, it can't be read. Only representations of testing can be read. Only descriptions of testing can be read. And it's okay, we believe, that business people don't have to read the code or the scripts for testing. It probably gets in the way in some cases to make this readable to a business person in the same way that it would be readable to a programmer or to a tester skilled in automation. I think those things are beside the point. Moreover, if you're trying to communicate testing by writing or by scripted checks, you're probably not being very helpful, and you're probably in conflict with Agile principles of customer collaboration, conversation over processes and tools. Let's focus on conversation, description, demonstration, and well fleshed out examples. Facings are also beside the point, in that the business needs us to produce things of value. They need us to do that efficiently. They need to learn what it values over time, rather than guessing at the start of development and freezing that guess until the end of development. Technology facing, that dimension of the quadrants, to us, simply means doing things that help us to build with change in mind, helping us to anticipate change. And that's something that the business absolutely needs but doesn't directly care about. And sometimes it goes on without them even knowing about it. So instead, let's look at the core heuristics of Agile development itself. Let's continuously refocus on value so that we can keep producing value. And let's work on development and testing in ways that reduce the cost of responding to constant change. Let's remember the subtitle of the very first book on XP, which got us started in so many ways on this Agile journey. The subtitle of that book, Extreme Programming, Embrace Change. Embrace change. Let's embrace change rather than deny it. So, how do we do Agile development? We do it in cycles. We discover something that's worth building, and then we build some of it. And as we build it, we're careful to build it with change in mind. Once we build it, we study what we've built, and then we iterate, we loop. Because after we've studied what we've built, we're probably going to discover something more that's worth building. Sometimes we discover something that's worth fixing, or something that's worth rebuilding. But we study what we've built, and we go back to the top of the loop, and the loop kind of looks more or less like this. There's a cycle in Agile development, and that cycle ought to be infused with testing. It should be pervaded with testing. It should have testing all over it, not just in the study what we built part, but also in the other three areas there, discovering something worth building, the other three tasks, the building some of it, the building with change in mind. So, what are the heuristics of Agile development? What does it mean to do it? First of all, we got to deliver frequently. It's important for us to demonstrate progress. It's important for us to work in short sprints to keep us from getting ahead of ourselves and to give us an opportunity to investigate problems before they get buried. To do Agile development means to collaborate across roles. Sometimes developers do testing work. Sometimes testers do development work. Sometimes everybody does documentation work. And sometimes, I would argue, it's important for everybody to do support work. Collaborating across roles is a good thing because by deploying our specialist skills in a generalist kind of fashion, we get to create quality products, and building quality products is a goal that we all share. It's important for us to cultivate skill and craftsmanship. You know, we can work according to any kind of development model. Agile, waterfall, fragile, scrummerfall, scrum butt. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the development process is. Without skill, we're sunk. And so, central to what we do in Agile development is to cultivate craftsmanship, to do the kinds of things that Ward Cunningham and Bob Martin and people like that espouse. It's terrific to see their focus on trying to persuade and encourage developers to develop actual development skill and skills in other domains too. Agile is not about following prescripted plans, and it's not about working to negotiated contracts. It's about customer collaboration, and it's about responding to change. And in order to do that, we like to travel light. We don't mind formalization when it's necessary. Remember the bottom of the Agile Manifesto where it says, while we value the things on the right, we value the things on the left more. So we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We value working with the customer over negotiated contracts that lock us in. We value responding to change over following a plan. Those are important things to us, and we certainly value working software over comprehensive documentation. Those things on the right, they're important, but we value the things on the left more, and we want to keep the things on the right at a lower priority because they tend to be expensive and time-consuming, and not so much interesting, and not so much fun, and not so valuable. That's the important thing. In Agile development, we apply appropriate heuristics. We recognize, as part of Agile development, that failures happen. A heuristic is a fallible way of solving a problem or making a decision. Heuristics are deployed, are followed, applied by people with the skill and the wisdom and the judgment to apply them. They're not really, I misspoke there, they're not really strictly followed in a sense. You're followed when you're doing what somebody else tells you or what a process manual tells you. A heuristic is used by people with judgment and skill, and we're aware of the possibility of failure. And we get over it. We learn from that failure and we move on. And we're tolerant of failure for that reason, because we learn. We develop and apply tools everywhere in software and development and in testing when we're working in an Agile project. And here's something really important for testers. We seek a sustainable pace, because people who are overwhelmed or overloaded tend not to do their best work. It's important for a tester to report on all the things that are making testing harder or slower, especially in an Agile project, because there's going to be lots of stuff that makes testing harder or slower. We need support from the product owner, from management, from the team. All right, so in order to do those things, in order to plug them in to Agile development, it's important for us to think in terms of tasks. That's the things around the ring. Discover something worth building, build some of it, build with change in mind. And things that will enable us to do those tasks and the motivations for doing those things. Here's what we do. We discover something worth building, and as we do so, we develop the design. We develop the design so that we can build some of it. We build some of it, and as we do, we build it cleanly and simply. Why? So that we can build it with change in mind. Now, as we build it with change in mind, we foster testability. We try to create a more testable product. Why? So that we can study what we've built. Studying what we built is important because that provides feedback back into the loop. So as we study what we've built, we experiment imaginatively and suspiciously. Those words we cribbed from Jerry Weinberg's 1961 chapter on software testing in his book, co-written with Herbert Leeds, called Computer Software Fundamentals. In that book, Jerry advocated for testers building their testing work around creating a suspicious nature and a lively imagination. Those words really resonated for me and James, and we were kind of stuck on exactly how to describe that upper left corner of what we do. It didn't take very long before we came to Jerry's words, so some honor is due there. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, in an Agile context, we're doing testing that in the upper right corner helps to develop the vision for and the understanding of the product. And we do that through discussion, through review, through thought experiments. We also do testing in the lower right quadrant that helps to refine the design and to prevent low-level coding errors and regressions. And we do that via TDD and BDD, unit checks, higher-level output checking, and that's mostly in the builder's domain, mostly in the programmer space. We prepare for a testing process that allows development to go more quickly, and we do that by advocating for intrinsic testability and subjective testability and project testability. I'm not going to have a whole lot of time to go into those things today, but suffice it to say, intrinsic testability is testability in the product. Subjective testability is getting the tester into a place where the tester learns so that the tester finds it easier to test. Testability is anything that makes it easier to test a product. Project testability is developing the group knowledge, the collective knowledge, the explicit and tacit knowledge about how to test this product. For more information on that, have a look at the Heuristics of Software Testability paper on James's website. And then in the upper left corner of our quadrants, we do deep testing for the problems that don't expose themselves in the lower right corner. We look for hidden problems, for unusual problems, for subtle problems, for corner cases. And in that context, we experiment. We do high volume, long sequence tool assisted testing. We explore using scenarios and something much deeper and much more involved than very simple use cases. We investigate the product and we probe it for things that could possibly go wrong. Things that could possibly go wrong, or things that are very, very deeply surprising. All the things that people say could never go wrong. And when a programmer says, no user would ever do that, what the programmer really means is no user that I've thought of and that I like would do that on purpose. And it's in those cases, the sorts of things that people might do by accident, the things that people might do when they're exploring the product, the things that were unpredicted or unanticipated in use cases. That's what we do when we're doing deep testing. So, let's illustrate that here. Let's put that on the map as well. Upper right corner, testing that helps to develop vision for the product. Lower right, output checking and review that helps to avoid simple coding errors and regressions. Lower left, any preparation needed for a test process that allows development to go quickly, supporting development. And, in the upper left corner, deep testing for hidden, rare, or subtle problems. Now, let's get into the brass tacks. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what those things are all about. What does developing the design mean, that thing in the upper right quadrant? It means exploring the definitions of done. One thing I'd like to point out, by the way, is that any time people come up with definitions of done, it seems to me they don't anticipate the possibility that there might be stuff that comes up outside the definition that we're going to have to deal with later. So, my definition of done is that we're done when we do not believe, and we have no reason to believe, that there are problems in the product that threaten its value to the degree that we don't want to release. In other words, done is no showstoppers. A showstopper, in our nomenclature, is simply something that makes more sense to fix than it does to ship. Products ship with problems sometimes. That's an unhappy state, but since a product can never be perfect, or can never be known to be perfect at any rate, it's our job to be tolerant of things that don't matter. When things matter, then it's important to fix them and to become aware of them as quickly as possible. But it's inevitable that in every project there's going to be something that dissatisfies somebody, and we have to deal with that. We have to deal with the possibility that that's going to happen. What we want to do is make sure that there are no problems that threaten the product, so much so that the value of the product or the value of the business would be threatened. But we can't guarantee to make everybody happy. Moreover, a lot of the time definitions of done involve creating these things called acceptance tests. And sometimes I hear from people that when our acceptance tests all pass, then we're done. And I like what J.B. Rainsberger said about that one time. He said, no, when the acceptance tests all pass, then you're really ready to give it to a real tester to kick the bejeebers out of it. He didn't use the word bejeebers. But the point here is that when the acceptance tests are all passing, that just means that the product is ready for the kind of deep testing that we see in the upper left quadrant. Developing the design also means engaging in discussions and conversations with diverse users and diverse stakeholders, programmers, product owners, subject matter experts, end users, other testers. Developing the design involves doing that, and everybody in the team participates in that. We'll get back to the idea of trading zones pretty shortly, but these are things that the upper left, or upper right and lower left quadrants are ones that are not necessarily entirely part of the builder mindset or the tester mindset. There's some place in between, and there's a lot of crossover between those things. We specify the product with rich examples. We evaluate and review reports in the field if the product has been out before. We look at reviews. We look at problem reports that have come into the support department. We think about the trade-offs, some of the things that I alluded to a little bit earlier on this slide. And we refine the user stories so that we can move on to the next step, which is to build the product cleanly and simply in an Agile context. That means automating low-level checks and building those checks along with the code. It means, among other things, establishing a shared coding style so that programmers can read each other's codes, so that the code can be shared, the code itself can be shared and made part of a group effort, and not just a single person. Review is really important, and a shared coding style helps to make that go more smoothly. And what's cool about that is it evolves. I don't think we have to mandate it. It shows up as an aspect of social interactions among the programmers as they review each other's code. In an Agile context, we want to build the product frequently. We want to make sure that the product is buildable and testable as absolutely soon as change has been made, so we can go at it and get testing at it right away. We refactor the product for maintainability. We want to be able to build it cleanly and simply and keep simplifying it and keep it as clean as possible so that we can maintain it most easily. And as we find bugs, we investigate them and we fix bugs. That's part of the builder's mindset. The building cleanly and simply, that's something that is mostly in the programmer space. Testers can help, just as programmers can help in the deep testing quadrant, but this is mostly oriented towards the programmers, this stuff here. Fostering testability. It's the role of a tester in an Agile team to do two things during those sprint meetings. First, to learn about the product, to learn everything that the tester can learn, and to advocate for testability. Ask for testability. Ask for scriptable interfaces. Ask for log files. Ask for simplicity. Ask for things that make the product easier and faster to test. In addition to that, as we move through development cycles, we get test infrastructure ready. We identify and explore ideas about risk. We try to minimize disruption when the product is changing. That is, we try to make the product easy to test, and we respond quickly to things that might put us off balance. We try to get rid of obstacles and distractions to testing and to the rest of development too. And we do testing in parallel with coding. We don't wait an awful long time for code to be refined or polished. As testers in an Agile context, indeed as rapid testers always, we test in parallel with coding, and we are willing to test anything. Give me anything to test as soon as you're ready. Experimenting imaginatively and suspiciously, figuring out whether we're done, finding problems that would suggest to us that we're not done, modeling the product in diverse ways, experimenting with it, developing rich test data, testing and checking against risks, probing mysteries and probing stories and probing unexplained events, and telling compelling stories about our bugs, telling a three-part story about the testing that we're doing, and telling why bugs matter, how they would threaten value to people, and developing the skill of doing that and reporting on it. So, let's plug those ideas into the quadrants as well. So we've got principles and activities of Agile development in the center, and then we've got some details on how we do that. Now, there's one other thing that's important to note here. This looks quite possibly kind of circular. The way I've been describing it is circular. But development itself isn't entirely linear. It's more like a hurricane. Yes, there's a big loop that's going around and round and round and round, but there's also mini cycles within it. There's little cycles, and indeed sometimes things even go backwards a little bit. Things overlap and they support each other. There are big loops and they combine, and there are small loops and we turn suddenly, and we go backwards in various places. So instead of thinking of testing something that is entirely in a cycle, think of it in terms of swirls as you stir a cup of coffee. There's an activity there, and there's not just a big loop, but there's also little swirls that go on as you stir the cup of coffee. And it's not like being tied to the hands of a clock. Those development cycles, those cycles happen in big loops and in little loops, whether we're doing stories or iterations or sprints or releases or spikes. Whatever label you like to put on it, development is always happening in these big loops and in these little loops. Now, we're most of the way there. Why is all this important? We want to honor the intentions, what we believe the intentions of the original developers of the Agile Quadrants were, which is to satisfy the customer through developing valuable software, producing the high-valued product at a low cost. Not at a low cost of the product itself, but at a low cost of development. We want to make development inexpensive and rapid and responsive. If we focus our attention on technical excellence and good design, that enhances agility. There's another dynamic at work, though, across. Instead of looking at critiquing the product and supporting the team, we've turned those a little bit backwards, a little bit inverted them. We have looked at that as a synthesizing process and then as an analyzing process. And they are not in opposition to one another. They are polarities, sure, but think of it like water. You can have water that's really hot, water that's really cold. You can have water that's in between. And so the process of thinking about high product value and low development cost, the processes of thinking about synthesizing and analyzing, those flow all the way around from the center to either end of those poles. And usually most of the time we're somewhere in between. There are other productive polarities too. Testing, the deep testing work is kind of a defocusing heuristic off the focusing effort associated with the builder's mindset. And as we're developing the product, we are envisioning success. Whereas when we're fostering testability, we're anticipating the possibility of failure and of stuff slipping below our awareness. There is a central obstacle in the middle of all this. The central obstacle is that there is a distance between the testing mindset and the builder's mindset. And there's also a focus associated with the skills of business analysis. Now, these are not insurmountable obstacles, and we can get around them. But it does take a lot of effort to change from a tester's mindset to a builder's mindset and vice versa. We don't make any claim that you have to be a different person in order to perform these different roles. We don't believe that we must have developers, testers rather, on an Agile team. Some Agile teams are successful with programmers only, but we do want to caution people, you might want to have one or more skilled testers on the team because it's so hard to change from the builder's mindset to the tester's mindset. When I'm writing, it's impossible to see my own typos. I see everybody else's typos, but never my own. When I'm developing an argument, it's really hard for me to see the flaws in my argument, and that's why I engage colleagues and critics in order to help me sharpen and refine my arguments. Similarly, as a tester, I prefer not to be a production programmer. I write tools, but my focus is on analyzing things rather than synthesizing them. My focus is on probing and exploring a product rather than building a product. It's a preference, it's a temperament. That all relates to the idea that critical distance is hard to achieve, the difference between one perspective and another. Testing benefits from diverse perspectives, and you can do shallow testing fairly easily at close critical distance. It's not too hard for programmers to do testing that's focused on units and that's focused on things that are something less than the big picture. Deeper or naturalistic long-form testing tends to require more distance. Now, a builder can do it, but a builder has to, we believe, get out of the builder's mindset. in order to do that really successfully. Now, trading zones. I alluded to those earlier. What are they? Peter Gallison, who is a historian and philosopher of science, introduced the notion of trading zones in science as a situation wherein people from different disciplines try to work together despite the fact that they come from different and maybe incompatible concepts and language. Harry Collins, in his work, and I'll give you a reference to that at the end of the talk, or actually in the next slide, defined trading zones as locations in which communities with a deep problem of communication manage to communicate. And sometimes we see that in development groups. Sometimes we see testers and builders, testers and programmers, having a hard time understanding one another and getting along. So if there's not a problem of communication, we don't have that problem. We simply have trade, not trading zones. But in Harry Collins's model, which he worked on with his colleagues, Rob Evans and I believe Martin Gorman, Collins talks about the issue associated with the fact that sometimes trading zones can be coerced. Sometimes they're enforced. Sometimes they are in situations, people are in situations where the expertise of an elite group, as he says, remain black boxed, that's his word, as far as the other participants are concerned. At the same time, the elite group will make little or no attempt to gain access to the expertise of the natives. Sometimes we've seen that kind of issue, certainly in the early days of trying to sort out where testers and programmers fit together in agile development groups. We saw that kind of issue, and we hope that that will go away as testers develop interactional expertise. That testers help to become interpreters for subject matter experts and for programmers. That programmers join testers, developing interactional expertise. That is, a capacity to talk to each other about testing, to work with each other, so that the testers can best help the programmers to do what the programmers need to do, which is to produce a quality product. So, we're coming to the end of our time. Here is our model, a kind of ecosystem for a bridge between rapid software testing and agile testing. And this is our sort of version 1.0 version of it. And we hope that you appreciate it. We hope that you find it useful. And we certainly hope that you will join us in talking about it, in refining it, in developing it, and getting the bugs out of it, so then somebody can come along with something much better a few years from now. With that, thank you very much, and I appreciate your attention and your perseverance. It's been a long talk, but I hope it's been helpful. Thanks again, all the best, and happy testing.